Hello, I'm Colleen Gallagher, CEO at Onward and Upward, and you're listening to the Association Insights podcast, where each week we interview association leaders from across the country to hear how they're trying new things, taking big risks, and delivering value for their members. We'll explore the realities of what it means to work in and with associations and bring you the insights and inspiration you need to advance your career and make big changes at your association. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Association Insights podcast. I'm your host, Meghan Henning. Today, I'm joined by someone I've had the privilege of working with for the past several years, Chris Burroughs, President and CEO of the Transportation Intermediaries Association. Chris stepped into the CEO role just over a year ago, but he's certainly no stranger to TIA or the broader logistics and transportation landscape. Prior to becoming CEO, he spent nearly 15 years leading TIA's government affairs efforts, helping position the association as a trusted voice on Capitol Hill and an advocate for the 3PL industry. Since taking the helm, Chris has brought that same strategic focus and tenacity to the full scope of TIA's mission at a time when the industry is facing both immense challenges and transformative opportunities. Today, we'll talk about what it's like to shift from subject matter expert to enterprise-wide leader, how TIA is leading the charge against rampant freight fraud, and why real-world stories from $400,000 lobster heist to small business recoveries are helping shape both public awareness and policy impact. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Megan. Good morning, and glad to be on the podcast here.
Thanks. We're happy to have you. So let's dive in. You stepped into the CEO role about a year after nearly 15 years leading government affairs at TIA. Looking back on your first year as CEO, what surprised you most about the transition from policy leader to organizational leader?
Yeah, I get this question a lot. I don't know if there's one thing that kind of surprised me the most. I think serving as the head of the government affairs shop certainly prepared me for kind of the role. Obviously, being in that role, you're really kind of responsible for developing the policy. And as a lot of people say, government affairs and advocacy is the tip of the spear of what a trade association does. So there's obviously a lot of strategic thinking, coalition building, working with your board of directors, executing on strategic goals and plans. So I'm not sure there's one thing that really surprised me in there, as assuming the role. Again, there are a lot of people that kind of have followed the same path that I have. But I think having been at TIA so long, almost 15 years, and when I first started, we were a very small organization, still small today, but smaller than we are now. You can wear a lot of different hats. So I saw a lot of different things. So I wasn't too surprised.
Yeah, that's great. It was the natural evolution to move on to this role. So that's great. Having spent so much time on Capitol Hill in your other role, how has that policy background shaped the way you think about leadership and strategy and where associations like TIA can truly move the needle?
Like I said, advocacy and government relations is the tip of the spear of what trade associations do, and that's no different from what we do. So really, obviously, when you're lobbying and doing advocacy work, everything is about strategic initiatives and goals and navigating kind of the complex world. And I don't know if it's a blessing or a disaster to work with Congress for as many years as I did. But you certainly figure out ways how to get things done, and especially the last number of years where there's been a lot of dysfunction on Capitol Hill, you certainly have to navigate some pretty rough waters to get things done. So I've really taken that kind of same strategy and critical thinking skills that I developed related to advocacy and government relations and really brought that organizational wide across TA with what we're doing with our education courses, what we're doing with our networking and membership value and our meetings. And really just at the end of the day, and I grew up working at a golf course through high school and college, and it's all about customer service, obviously, and customer relation. And I brought that to Capitol Hill when I worked for Congress, and certainly with the trade association, I brought that as well. At the end of the day, it's all about member value and delivering that for your folks that are part of your organization. In terms of customer and member satisfaction is the key.
I think that's such a great point and a great thing for our listeners to hear, because running an association does require, as you said, that you learn to have all these skills on Capitol Hill and learn to navigate that. There's lots of different personalities. There's lots of different pushback and opportunities. So being able to learn that is such a great skill. What advice would you give to an association leader stepping into the CEO role after having previously served on staff? So, especially when it comes to shifting from a subject matter expert to a functional lead to enterprise-wide leader.
I think if it's, like I said, if somebody who's been on staff for a number of years with an organization, and I'm part of a couple CEO groups, and I'm not unique in this. There's actually a lot of people that seem to be a general transition or natural progression, as you said, from like a government affairs role. I think because of that kind of breadth of role that we take within an organization or an association, it's a natural push up. But I would say, obviously, getting to that role, really what kind of shaped me was, like I said, being part of a small organization, really touching every aspect of the organization prior to assuming that role. And then obviously when you come in, you got to take that much deeper dive. But like I said, when I first started at TIA 14 years ago or around that time, I think there was maybe less than 10 of us on staff. So it was kind of like, hey, all hands on deck. We need help with membership renewal. All hands on deck with meetings or education. And you just did everything. And it's really no different than it is now, obviously, with us being a little bit bigger and talking with a lot of folks in the trade association space. You do wear many different hats. So it's a natural progression to really take that next step. I think if my first CEO job was outside of TIA or a trade organization, there would have been much more of a learning curve that I would have to have dealt with, or any individual would have to deal with. But coming from an organization that I was comfortable with, had built really solid relationships with the members over the years, which is certainly key, getting in front of those key board members and just the general membership as well. I have a lot of good personal relationships with a lot of members and just a business relationship with the members that I've built over the last 14 years. And that's not something that's new. That's something that I started day one with TIA is, hey, I've got to take care of my folks. And again, I think that goes back to my kind of customer service that's been beaten in my head over the years of my different jobs. And my dad obviously played a big role in that from his professional career as well. So customer service is key. Build those relationships, learn the association. And associations are different. So you got to navigate that as well.
That's excellent advice. Now I want to switch to fraud. And when we first met each other, I remember you said that sometimes your members can encounter fraud. That was like 4.5 years ago. And now fraud has clearly become the number one issue facing TIA members. From your vantage point, what has changed in the scale or sophistication of fraud? And why is this issue hitting small and mid-sized transportation businesses especially hard right now?
Yeah, I think not to continue to go back to when I started at TIA, but one of the first pieces of legislation I worked on with TIA, and actually I was with a small lobbying firm representing TIA before I joined this, was a piece of legislation called the Fighting Fraud and Transportation Act. So it's something that's certainly been on our radar for a very long time. Back then, when we were even pushing for that legislation, it wasn't the type of fraud and theft that we're seeing today. I think really kind of the two big things that escalated this is obviously we saw a massive increase in cargo theft and strategic fraud and theft during the pandemic. I think there was a massive spotlight on the supply chain. Everybody was talking about freight and volumes and disruptions. And I think this criminal element certainly saw that as well. Really began taking advantage of a situation where you have such a massive amount of volume and freight and reliance on the supply chain and easily disrupted process. And they also saw that there was really a lack of enforcement from the federal agency. There was a lot of loopholes. There was a lot of regulatory loopholes that were easily exploited. 14 years ago, when we were talking about it, it was the mom and pop, if you will, kind of fraud or cargo theft that's out there. And now it's really graduated to a massive scale, organized criminal ring that's going on. And yeah, no one is safe from it. Large, medium, small companies are all being impacted by it. There's constant phishing going out there in terms of strategic theft and gaining access to credentials, plus also the traditional cargo theft of just stolen freight.
Which is just crazy to think about when I think you're right, like talking about the supply chain in terms of COVID, that is like where I feel like everybody learned that phrase, right? Like I remember my own like second grader was like, "Oh, is that because of a supply chain issue?" Because it was constant. People were constantly talking about it. But now seeing that it's so sophisticated and it's on so many levels, talk to me about how TIA has taken just like a multi-pronged approach to tackling fraud. Like you're trying to hit it with on the advocacy and the legislation side to like members tools like your fraud report and white papers and post-incident checklists and partnerships with the FBI, which is brand new. So talk to me about how building like an ecosystem like this is going to help your members and ultimately help the entire supply chain.
This is, as you mentioned, this is the number one issue that's truly facing our industry. And not just our industry, but also the shippers, people who make things and ship products, in addition to the trucking companies and motor carriers that are out there as well. Really at TIA, and we've really tackled this issue head on and really have developed as many different avenues and verticals to address this problem as we can. We want to be, it's easy to go and blame the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration or go to Congress and say, hey, we really need to have this completed and sit on your hands. That's not the approach that we're going to take and certainly haven't taken. We have a role in this as well, obviously, from our membership perspective and working with the shipper community and working with the trucking community. Like I said, we're all in this together. It impacts all of our different segments of the industry. It impacts us as consumers as we go to grocery stores and really feel the pinch of this theft going on and rising insurance cost. And we ultimately bear the cost of that when we go buy something at the store. So we've really continued to really try to be a leader in this space of addressing cargo theft and strategic theft and coming up with as many different variety of ways as we can to help protect our members and mitigate some of the risk associated with this. We got some cool things that are coming out this year as well in 2026 that we'll talk about in the coming months or coming weeks when we release it. But yeah, we're excited with the direction we're going. We're obviously not excited about the issue because it is so bad and it does have major impact to a lot of our companies and is increasing the cost of doing business in a hard economic time when volumes certainly haven't come down, maybe a little bit from COVID, but volumes are pretty solid. It's just the pricing is tough right now in terms of the marketplace. So it's hurting our folks, but we got to continue to be a leader in this space, like I said, and that's with our own membership, with Congress, with the federal agencies, with other industry stakeholders, with law enforcement, as you mentioned, in terms of our FBI collaboration we're doing with the data share.
I think that's smart too, to be able to go after all of the places that you can to tackle a problem such as this because it's so widespread. On the advocacy front, what are the key policy priorities TIA is pushing on Capitol Hill when it comes to fraud? And what do association leaders need to understand about how long-term policy change actually can happen?
There's a couple of pieces of legislation that we're particularly pushing for on Capitol Hill to address this problem. And we talked about how does policy change and long term. One of these is a piece of legislation called the Household Goods Protection Act. It includes general freight. That's just what the name is in terms of the legislation was household goods. But really, it's things that were implemented back in that piece of legislation I talked about, the Fighting Fraud and Transportation Act, which was signed into law in 2012. It's reaffirming some of those positions that haven't been implemented yet. So that, again, as I said at the beginning, navigating Capitol Hill and Congress is certainly its own animal. But these are things that we're going back to Congress to be like, hey, you guys passed this and signed it, and President Obama signed it in law in 2012. We need to really move forward with this. So that's part of it, is really implementing some of those changes that were done that really would have an impact on addressing this problem. There's no silver bullet, obviously, in terms of the issue, which is why we have to continue to hit it from all different verticals and fronts. Because again, there is no silver bullet. There's not one thing we can do or the federal agency can do or Congress can do tomorrow that's going to fix this problem. It's still going to exist. We just have to continue to tackle it. The other piece is a piece of legislation called the Combating Organized Crime Act and Retail Crime Act, which really talks about collaboration, which is another key piece. All the different federal agencies, law enforcement need to start working better together. You're starting to see some of that. We met with the FMCSA leadership last week, and there's already discussions going on. There's already collaboration going on, which is great. But we need to continue to see that moving forward in terms of greater collaboration across federal agencies. When everybody starts talking more and collaborating on these problems that exist out in the marketplace, again, that will just help everybody in the space.
That's great. It sounds like you also need a healthy dose of patience when dealing with.
Yes. Yeah. My dad was a longtime congressional staffer, and he gave me advice. And he's never burn a bridge. And there's a lot of times when you're working through advocacy and lobbying, you're like, oh my God, I can't deal with this anymore. But you always got to remember, patience is the key. And you never know who this individual you're working with, who may be an opponent on an issue at one point in time. Later down the road, they could be one of your champions on a key issue. So never burn a bridge. That's something I live by.
Yeah, that's great. Great advice. So I want to talk about over the holidays, TIA and one of your members shared a really powerful story about a $400,000 lobster heist that gained national attention. Why was it important to elevate a real member story alongside the broader industry data? And how do you decide when a moment is right to step into the media spotlight?
Think, especially with this issue of cargo theft and strategic theft, I think it's been reported that about 90% of instances are not even reported out. So people just eat the cost or pay the cost of the freight. And then, because there's obviously a reputational game here that they don't want their name out in the press and they don't want their reputation to be hurt by showing that, hey, I may not be able to safely, efficiently control my shipper customer's freight, which certainly is not the case. As we know, these criminals are very smart, they're very organized, and they may blast out 100 different fraudulent schemes, and you can be right 99 times out of 100, and that one time could cost you $400,000 worth of frozen lobster meat. We need to continue to talk about this issue. We need to continue to get it out into the national media. I am hugely appreciative to our member for stepping up and putting his kind of neck out there and saying, hey, there's something that we probably could have caught here, but this is a huge national problem that's going on that is slipping through cracks all over the place. And again, these are very smart, organized folks. We as an organization want to continue to paint this picture of this is a massive problem. And we've been talking about it with the press for a long time. And the 60 Minutes did a story about it it took Guy Fieri and Sammy Hagar's tequila brand to have 2 truckloads stolen, to have that celebrity brought into it. But in a lot of ways, this most recent incident, the lobster meat stolen around the Christmas holiday, certainly resonated with the national media. And really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing from our internal data, from our internal fraud hotline that we put together, within the first couple of weeks, we saw $6.5 million of freight that had been stolen that our members or the insurance companies are not going to have to pay for. That's a massive problem. So as much as we can continue to put it out there, because of the severity and size of this issue, the better.
Yeah, that's great. And I also think that media moment wasn't just about visibility. It was about education, as you said, getting it out there and sharing the story and impact. So, what did that experience reinforce for you about the role associations can play as credible, trusted voices during moments of crisis or disruption?
Kind of to your point, we just said it's just educating. We as a trade association need to continue to educate not only folks in Capitol Hill, but also the media on kind of the role that we're playing in the supply chain. Going back to the pandemic, people certainly didn't think about like how freight was getting to the shelves. And obviously, when you saw the port delays and the massive supply chain disruptions that were going on, people started thinking about, oh, hey, what are these logistics companies? What do your members do? Should you guys be considered essential? And it's like, absolutely. We're the ones that are facilitating the freight across the country and nationwide to make sure that it's getting to where it needs to go. Trucks obviously delivering it or train, but our folks are having a huge role in that. So education is key, as you said. We need to continue as a trade association to educate everyone on what's going on, and particularly on massive issues that are impacting the supply chain, the consumer, and adding to inflation that we're feeling in the marketplace and the overall macroeconomic picture. These things matter.
And one of the things that I love about associations and working in an association, which I've done for many years of my life, and now working with them, is that you get the benefit of many voices as opposed to one. And that does really amplify the trust that I think members have when they join your association. So I definitely like that, resonates very with me. Looking ahead to 2026, what advice would you give association leaders who are balancing urgent member issues, long-term advocacy goals, and growing expectations to communicate clearly and publicly, like often all at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. I would put it into perspective in terms of what I'm thinking is obviously, like I mentioned in the beginning, everything that we do at TIA is in terms of member value. So when we're putting together our strategic plan or our annual business plan for 2026, which we're currently working on, everything is driven on, hey, what is the value that we're bringing back to members? As I talked about, it is a hard economic time in the freight and logistics space now. Not to say that every one of our members is obviously struggling, because depending on where your niche is and depending on what's going on with tariffs or other economic issues, you could kind of feel the pressure a little bit. But as we're looking at everything within our organization, everything that we're looking to roll out in 2026, it's addressing massive issues like cargo theft and driving and delivering back value to our membership. That's the key.
I think this is great. I so appreciate you being on the podcast. I think you've given our listeners a lot of really good advice that they can put into play like right now. So I appreciate this. We wrap up every podcast with a couple, just for fun, rapid questions, just so our listeners can get to know you. So, what are you currently obsessed with? Book, show, hobby, or idea?
It's going to sound kind of corny, but I got 3 little kids and I love spending time with them. And they got a whole bunch of Legos for Christmas. We've been building a lot of Legos. So I'd say that's probably our obsession.
Legos are a good one.
Yeah. So building Legos until the weather gets good, then that's back on the golf course.
Yeah. What is your ideal comfort food?
I like a lot of food, but probably pizza. If I had to go with comfort food, it's probably pizza.
Yeah. And then what's a travel moment that still makes you smile when you think about it?
I have a lot of those. We just took the kids on a Disney cruise last summer. That was a
Fun.
blast. Yeah, my wife and I've been to Ireland, so that was awesome. That was a pretty cool adventure. But yeah, either one of those. Seeing the kids, or maybe taking. We took my daughter's my oldest, and I have a son and then another son. We took the 2 oldest to Disney World when they were really little. Maybe the first time they met Mickey. That was probably something that will always stick in my memory.
Nice.
So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in.
That's a wrap for today's episode. The Association Insights podcast, previously known as the Association 100 podcast, is a production of Onward and Upward Marketing and Communications, where our mission is to make associations and nonprofits the go-to source in their industries through earned media and thought leadership. This podcast is an extension of our newsletter, a bi-monthly collection of best practices, top trends, helpful ideas, and smart strategies delivered straight to your inbox. Have you undertaken a big change at your association? Or do you have some words and wisdom from the trenches of association life? We want to hear from you, and so do our listeners. Drop us a note at info@onwardupward.com. That's info@onwrdupwrd.com. Be sure to subscribe, give us a 5-star review, and share with your friends and colleagues. We're available anywhere podcasts are found. Come back next week for more association insights and inspiration. Thanks for tuning in.